Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. This week we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 139th deck and it's titled Contractual Obligations. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card was suggested to us by Tyler Esme over on Patreon, and that card is Liliana's Contract. So Liliana's Contract is 3 black for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 4 cards and lose 4 life. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more demons with different names, you win the game. So obviously, we are going to be trying to build around this as much as possible. That means we are going to be playing a bunch of demons, but we had to figure out a commander that would work for this card, and eventually we settled on Kaalia Zenith Seeker. So this is not the Kaalia that people are probably afraid of, so that is something to be aware of. But Kaalia Zenith Seeker, still a very powerful creature. She is red, white, black for a 3/3 human cleric, flying and vigilance. When Kaalia Zenith Seeker enters the battlefield, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an angel, a demon, and or a dragon from among them, put them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. So essentially, she is here to give us the colors that we want, while at the same time being a source of card draw, because we can reveal the cards from the top of our deck. And yeah, it also hits dragons and angels, and if I'm being perfectly honest, we do not have a ton of those. I think we have exactly 1 angel and no dragons. So it is possible that we can get multiple cards off of this, but it is very unlikely. It's still pretty decent overall. Now, with that being said, though, we got to talk a little bit about some of the themes for this deck. And as you can probably guess, our first theme is, of course, demons. Since we're playing a ton of demons, we want to try to make Liliana's Contract viable, so we want to try to make sure we have at least 4 different demons in our upkeep. So we've got a ton of different demons to make that work, and one of the best ones for us is Rakdos the Showstopper, which is 4 black-red for a 6/6 legendary creature demon. It's got flying and trample. When Rakdos enters the battlefield, flip a coin for each creature that isn't a demon, devil, or imp, and destroy each creature whose coin comes up tails. So this could be a one-sided board wipe. It's never going to hit any of our stuff. Well, I guess that's not 100% true since Kaalia is not a demon, devil, or imp, so it could destroy Kaalia. But most of what we're going to have is not going to be destroyed by Rakdos. Our next major theme for this deck is going to be focusing on flickering our creatures. Because Kaalia has entered the battlefield effects, Rakdos has entered the battlefield effects, a lot of other demons care about entering the battlefield. We're going to use cards like Semester's End to both rebuy their abilities while at the same time protecting them. So Semester's End is 3 and a white for an instant. Exile any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of the next end step, return each of them to the battlefield under its owner's control. Each of them enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter if it's a creature, and an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker. So essentially, this is going to allow us to, like I said, rebuy some of our effects so we can reuse Rakdos or reuse Kaalia, but at the same time, it's also going to be protection. Because those creatures return at the next end step, we can cast this in response to a board wipe and then exile all of our creatures and bring them back, making sure that we're still able to do what we want to do when it gets around to our turn. Now, moving into our final theme of the deck, this is where we're going to lean pretty hard into creatures dying. There's a surprising amount of demons that care specifically about when creatures die, or in some cases, in Rakdos' case specifically, they care about actually making the creatures die. So a good example of a payoff for this is Reaper from the Abyss, which is 3 black for a 6/6 demon with flying, and it has Morbid. So at the beginning of each end step, not just ours, but every end step, if a creature died this turn, destroy target non-demon creature. So we can kind of pick apart what our opponents are doing, and if one creature dies, we can guarantee that a second one also dies. Now, if our opponents are playing demons, then we're at a little bit of a loss because we can't destroy them, but that's probably not going to happen very often. So that is the main focus of our deck. We just want to play a bunch of big demons. We want to be able to blink them, and we want to be able to kill our opponent's things. So with that being said, let's move on to some of our key cards and talk about the cards that are going to be incredibly effective in helping us to win the game, but also just generating some value. So the first key card that I'd like to talk about is Herald of Slaanesh. Now, you might already know this, but a lot of demons are very expensive. They're 6, 7, 8 mana, and that's going to be pretty tough for us to get to, and at least survive while we get to it. So Herald of Slaanesh, which is 2 and a red for a 2/2 demon, is going to make other demon spells we cast cost 2 less to cast, and it's going to give our other demons haste. So that's going to be incredibly important because now, not only can we cast our 6 drops on turn 4, we also give them haste so they can immediately come down and start hitting people, which really accelerates the game plan of what the demons are trying to do. Our next key card is going to be Nahiri's Resolve. So again, we're talking a little bit about blinking some of our creatures, and Nahiri's Resolve is going to be perfect for making sure that we always have our creatures when it gets back around to our turn. So Nahiri's Resolve is 3 red, white for an enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and have haste. And at the beginning of your end step, exile any number of non-token artifacts and or creatures you control. Return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of your next upkeep. So as long as we are able to keep our demons on the board for our turn, we're guaranteed to have them on our next turn because we're going to exile them and bring them back. So if our opponents are waiting until their turn to wipe the board or destroy all the creatures, we don't really have to worry about that because our creatures aren't going to be there if they try to wipe the board at sorcery speed. And that is why Nahiri's Resolve, very good. Also, similar to Herald of Slaanesh, gives haste, which is a little underrated in some cases. And then finally, we get to our last key card, and this one is Sephara Sky's Blade. One of the only non-demons in the entire deck, but I do think she's worth it because she is 4 white, white, white for a 7/7 angel. You may pay white and tap 4 untapped creatures you control with flying rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Flying, lifelink. Other creatures you control with flying have indestructible. A good number of our demons fly, so being able to have giant indestructible flyers can probably end the game in our favor pretty quickly. And since Sephara can come down pretty early, we just have to pay a white and tap 4 untapped creatures with flying. That's something that we are able to do pretty efficiently and pretty effectively. So Sephara is going to come down and pretty much protect our board in the same way that Nahiri's Resolve might, but in this case we get to actually keep our creatures on the battlefield. So those are all of our key cards, and the next thing we got to do for this deck tech is take a look at some cool interactions. These are the things that work pretty well together, or in some cases are just cards that I want to highlight because I think they're pretty cool. So the first of those is going to be Bloodspeaker and Rune Scarred Demon. So Bloodspeaker is 3 and a black for a 3/2 Ogre Shaman. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice Bloodspeaker. If you do, search your library for a demon card, reveal that card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library, and whenever a demon comes into play under your control, return Bloodspeaker from your graveyard to your hand. And we're going to partner that up with Rune Scarred Demon, which is 5 black black for a 6/6 demon with flying. When Rune Scarred Demon enters the battlefield, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So you might notice both of these cards search our library for at least a card. Rune Scarred Demon could be anything. Bloodspeaker does have to be a demon. But whenever Bloodspeaker dies, we can return Bloodspeaker to our hand if a demon comes into play. And that's going to be incredibly useful because whatever we tutor with Bloodspeaker can then get it back. But if we are using Rune Scarred Demon as what we've tutored for, we can tutor for something that could potentially get Bloodspeaker back out of our graveyard, in fact, another demon, and then kind of keep this chain going, because once it's put back into our hand, we get another demon, and we keep going, and we can keep tutoring for Rune Scarred Demon and from Bloodspeaker, and then maybe get, like I said, get stuff back, blink things, and it just kind of gets out of control very, very quickly. So it's not super powerful, and it's probably not going to win the game on its own, but it is a nice value engine to be aware of. Next, though, our next cool interaction is going to be Molten Echoes and Chaos Defiler. So Molten Echoes is kind of an MVP in the deck already because we have a ton of enter the battlefield effects. And so Molten Echoes is 2 red red for an enchantment. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Whenever a non-token creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of that creature. That token gains haste, and exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So since we have so many enter the battlefield effects, being able to double up on those by making token copies of our creatures is incredibly powerful. And the one thing that I want to highlight for this is going to be if we use it with Chaos Defiler, because Chaos Defiler is 3 red, black for an artifact creature demon construct. It's a 5/4 with trample, and when it dies or enters the battlefield, for each opponent choose a non-land permanent that player controls and destroy one of them chosen at random. So we can choose the 3 best things for each opponent and then destroy one of them, making this pretty efficient. When Molten Echoes is making a copy of it and we get to do it twice, we can guarantee the removal of 2 permanents. Then if we send the Chaos Defiler in for combat, maybe it gets blocked and killed, we get to do it again. If the token dies, we get to do it again. So it can be very, very effective to just destroy a ton of permanents. And yeah, we don't get to choose specifically the one that we want to get rid of, but it's still good enough that I think it deserves a mention. So with all of our cool interactions out of the way, let's move into the price of this deck. And this week, our price of the deck came out to $96.07, so just barely under our budget limit of $100. And the most expensive card in the entire deck is Archfiend of Despair. So Archfiend of Despair is 6 black for a 6/6 demon with flying. Your opponents can't gain life. And at the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life that player lost this turn. So if we hit an opponent for 5, we move to our end step, they lose 5 life, we essentially hit them for 10. And that can be very powerful with a lot of life loss effects and a lot of big demons. So Archfiend really pulls its weight in the deck. But on the other hand, it is $11, so if you do need to cut it for budget purposes, there are other demons you could replace it with, so it's not necessary. It is just very strong. On the other hand, if you're looking for a card to put into the deck that I think would make it a little bit better, but is out of our budget, I have a suggestion for you there as well. So this week, the card that I would recommend putting in is Bloodthirster. And Bloodthirster is 5 red for a 6/6 flying trampled demon. Whenever Bloodthirster deals combat damage to a player, untap it. After this combat phase, there's an additional combat phase, but it can't attack a player it's already attacked this turn. If we do this right, if we have Bloodthirster and everything kind of falls into place, we can get 3 additional combat phases. And yeah, Bloodthirster might not be able to attack on the last one, but it's still giving us a total of 4 combats every single turn, which is a very quick way to close out the game when we have a bunch of different demons. So if we're putting it in, though, we do have to take a card out, and the card I would recommend taking out is Obnixilis of the Black Oath. The main reason that I would recommend taking out Obnixilis is because he's 5 mana for a Planeswalker, which isn't terrible, and he's got +2, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain life equal to life lost this way. -2, create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying, lose 2 life. -8, you get an emblem with pay 2, sacrifice a creature, you gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. We are almost never going to make good use of this Planeswalker in the way that we would like, because if it's making demons, we're -2, we can only do that once before we have to then start plussing. Even if we +2, each opponent's losing a life, we gain maybe 3. That's not really going to be that great in the long term. And then there's very little chance we ever actually make it to the emblem. So I think overall, this is just not the deck for Obnixilis. I put it in here because it makes a demon, but I don't think a 5 mana 5/5 demon that costs us 2 life is where we really want to be. So I don't think it's quite that good in here. If you think I'm wrong, please do let me know. I would love to hear arguments for why Obnixilis should be in the deck, or maybe you want to tell me why it shouldn't be in the deck and I should just take it out anyway. But either way, I would love to hear it. So with all of that, I think that covers most of our deck tech. So before we jump into a game to actually see how this deck performs, I want to take a second to highlight some of the ways you can help support the channel if that's something you're interested in doing. You can, of course, find us over on Twitter, Reddit, send us an email. Those are all great ways to reach out. And if you're looking to support us a little bit more directly, you can find us on Patreon and right here on YouTube as a channel member, where you can join the amazing people listed below, such as William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Calvin Schmidt, Eric Huey, Jeff Winger, Jeffrey Boos, Salty and Sunshine, Teller Esme, Sven von Nimwegen, and Paddywhack. So to the 10 of you, thank you all so much for all of your support. And of course, if you can't join the Patreon or as a channel member, I completely understand. May not be for everybody, but you can always just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out quite a bit, especially because we're trying to make the push to 1,000 subscribers before the end of 2023. So if you can help us get there, or maybe send this to friends who might also be able to help us get there, I would really appreciate that. So with all of that being said, let's take a look at how this deck performs in a game. So this week, we are going to be running up against 3 separate opponents, trying to do our best to knock them out with some demons. So starting up, you might notice that this is a very Dimir and Mardu heavy table. This was actually a game that we played close to Halloween, so we wanted to fill it with some Halloween flavored decks, which is where I've got the demons. Jason is joining us with Will Helt the Rock Cleaver and some zombies. Bilal has Edgar Markov and vampires. And Shawn has Umbrous Fear Manifest, which is nightmares and horrors. So I don't think there's really too much to say about each of these decks. They kind of do what they say. So Will Help being a zombie deck means that there's probably going to be a ton of zombies and a ton of card draw. Edgar Markov being a vampire deck means that there's probably going to be a ton of vampires. And then Umbrous is going to have some horrors and some milling and some exiling. I do think overall, if I have to pick one of these decks to be the most afraid of, it is definitely Edgar, because Edgar is just crazy strong, and the Eminence ability just makes for a very powerful board state very quickly. So Edgar is definitely my pick for the one that's going to be the hardest for us to fight. If you think I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear arguments for why each of these might be the toughest for our deck to face. But with all of that being said, I hope you enjoy the game. I know I certainly will, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Jason goes first, followed by Bilal, Shawn, and then myself. On Jason's first turn, he plays a Myriad Landscape. Bilal plays a Voldaran Estate, using it to cast a Stromkirk Noble, losing a life. Then the Noble gets a +1/+1 counter whenever it deals combat damage to a player, and Bilal triggers Edgar Markov's Eminence ability, creating a 1/1 vampire token. Shawn plays a Mystic Sanctuary. I play an Exotic Orchard. Jason plays an Island. Bilal plays a Tainted Field, then casts Skull Clamp. He moves to combat, attacking Jason and Shawn, both for 1, putting a counter on Stromkirk Noble. Then, in his second main phase, he equips the Skull Clamp to his vampire token, giving it +1/-1, letting him draw 2 cards when it dies, which it immediately does thanks to getting -1 toughness, so Bilal draws 2. Shawn plays a Swamp and casts Preordain, scrying 2 and drawing a card. I play a Swamp. Jason plays a Swamp and casts Dire Graph Colossus, making a 2/2 zombie token whenever he casts a zombie spell. Bilal plays an Inspiring Vantage and casts Stromkirk Captain, giving his other vampires +1/+1 in first strike, then also making a 1/1 vampire token with Edgar. He moves to combat and attacks me for 3 with the Noble, putting a +1/+1 counter on it. Shawn plays a Swamp and casts Yarok's Fenlurker, making each opponent exile a card from their hand. I play a Mountain and cast Herald of Slanesh, making all my demons cost 2 less and giving them all haste. Jason plays a Tainted Isle and casts Cryptbreaker, letting him discard a card to make a zombie token and tap 3 zombies to draw a card and lose a life. This also makes him a zombie token with a Colossus. Then he also casts Midnight Reaper, letting him draw a card and lose a life whenever one of his non-token creatures dies, and he makes another zombie. Bilal plays a Mountain and casts Olivia Voldaran, which can do 1 damage to a creature, turning it into a vampire and putting a +1/+1 counter on herself, then also allowing him to pay 5 mana to gain control of target vampire for as long as Olivia is on the battlefield. This makes another vampire with Edgar, and he moves to combat, attacking Shawn for 2 and me for 5, putting another counter on the Noble. Shawn plays a Waterfront District. On my turn, I cast my commander, Kaalia Zenith Seeker, looking at the top 6 cards of my library, revealing an angel, demon, and/or dragon from among them, and putting it into my hand. Unfortunately though, I don't hit anything, putting all the cards to the bottom of my library. Then I play a Terramorphic Expanse, sacrificing it to search my library for a basic land, putting it into play tapped. At the end of turn, Jason taps 3 zombies to draw a card and gain a life. Jason casts Lord of the Accursed, giving his zombies +1/+1, making a zombie token, then attacks Shawn and I both for 3 with a zombie. In his second main phase, he plays a Dimir Aqueduct, returning an island to his hand. On Bilal's turn, he casts Florian, Voldar, and Scion, letting him, in his post-combat main phase, look at the top X cards of his library, where X is the total amount of life lost by his opponents this turn, and exiling one of them, being able to play it until the end of turn, putting the rest on the bottom. This also makes him another vampire. Then he equips Olivia with Skull Clamp, giving her +1/-1, letting him draw 2 cards when she dies, and attacks me for 6 with a Noble, putting a counter on it, and attacks Shawn for 6 with 3 vampires. This lets him look at the top 12 cards of his library in his second main phase, exiling Nomad Outpost and playing it for turn. Shawn plays a Choked Estuary. I play a Swamp and cast the Balrog of Moria. I move to combat, attacking Jason for 3 with Kaalia. Then, at the end of turn, Jason taps 3 zombies to draw a card and lose a life. On Jason's turn, he plays an island and passes. Bilal casts Captivating Vampire, making a vampire token, but before it can resolve, Shawn flashes in Overcharged Amalgam, exploiting Yarok's Fenlurker when it enters to counter the spell. Bilal then attacks Shawn for 11 total damage, and he blocks the Stromkirk Noble with the Amalgam, killing it and only taking 4 damage instead. In Bilal's second main phase, he looks at the top 4 cards of his library with Florian, exiling Phyrexian Tower from among them and playing it for turn. He immediately uses the tower to sacrifice a vampire token, making 2 black mana to cast Sanctum Seeker, making another vampire token, and also making each opponent lose a life while Bilal gains a life whenever a vampire he controls attacks. Shawn casts Dimir Signet, then casts Factor Fiction, revealing the top 5 cards of his library, letting an opponent separate them into 2 piles, putting one pile into his hand and the other into his graveyard. This has me choosing for Shawn to put Exotic Orchard, Whispersilk Cloak, and Reflections of Litjara into his hand, and Evolving Wilds and Drown in the Loch into his graveyard. He then plays the Exotic Orchard as his land for turn, and passes. On my turn, I play a Swamp and cast Orcus, Prince of Undeath for X=4, giving all other creatures -4/-4 until the end of turn, losing me 4 life and wiping away the board. In response, Jason taps 6 zombies to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, then he also draws 4 more cards and loses 4 more life thanks to Midnight Reaper seeing his board die. Bilal also gets to draw 2 cards since Olivia was equipped with Skull Clamp, and I move to combat, attacking Bilal for 4 with the Balrog. At the end of turn, Jason sacrifices his Myriad Landscape to search his library for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. Then on his turn, Jason plays a Sunken Hollow and casts Crowded Crypt, followed up by casting Undead Augur, letting him draw a card and lose a life whenever a zombie dies under his control. He also casts his commander Wilhelt the Rock Cleaver, letting him make a 2/2 zombie token with Decayed whenever a zombie he controls without Decayed dies. On Bilal's turn, he casts Molten Echoes, naming Vampire, so whenever a non-token vampire enters under his control, he makes a token copy of it with haste. After that, he casts Gul'Draz's Assassin, making a copy of it and also making a vampire token, then moves to combat, attacking Shawn for 1 and me for 6, putting another counter on the Noble. In his second main phase, he equips the copy of Gul'Draz's Assassin with Skull Clamp, killing it and drawing 2 cards. Then he plays a Swamp and equips a vampire token with the Skull Clamp, killing it and drawing 2 more cards. On Shawn's turn, he casts Soul Ring, then casts Consuming Aberration, which has power and toughness equal to the number of cards in all opponents' graveyards, and also makes each opponent mill until they hit a land whenever Shawn casts a spell. He then casts Fractured Sanity, milling each opponent for 14, and also milling them until they hit a land, which happened to be the top card of everyone's library. On my turn, I play a Swamp, then cast Obnixilis of the Black Oath, activating his +2 ability to make each opponent lose a life while I gain life equal to the life lost this way, which is 3. Jason casts Liliana's Mastery, making 2 zombie tokens when it enters and giving his zombies +1/+1. Then he casts Endless Ranks of the Dead, letting him make X zombie tokens in his upkeep, where X is half the number of zombies he controls rounded down. In Jason's end step, Will Help triggers, letting him sacrifice a zombie token to draw 2 cards, lose a life, and create a zombie token with Decayed. Bilal plays a Bloodstained Mire, sacrificing it to lose a life and search his library for a swamp, putting it into play. He also casts Blood Artist, which allows him to gain a life while target opponent loses a life whenever a creature dies, making another copy of it and a vampire token thanks to Molten Echoes and Edgar. He equips Skull Clamp to the vampire token, killing it, drawing 2 cards, gaining 2 life, and having me lose 2 life. He also casts Legion's Landing, making a 1/1 vampire token with lifelink when it enters the battlefield. After that, he casts Malakir Blood Witch, entering with a copy of itself and another vampire token. Then, when it enters the battlefield, each of Bilal's opponents lose life equal to the number of vampires he controls, while he gains life equal to the life lost this way. Both Blood Witches make each opponent lose 8 life for a total of 16, knocking me out of the game and gaining Bilal 48 life. He moves to combat, attacking Shawn for 10 with the Noble and the copy of the Blood Witch, and Shawn blocks the Noble, only taking 4, but since he kills the Noble, Bilal is able to gain 2 life and make Shawn lose 2 life, knocking him out of the game anyway. In Jason's upkeep, he makes 2 zombies with Endless Ranks of the Dead, then plays a swamp and casts Champion of the Perished, which gets a +1/+1 counter whenever a zombie enters under Jason's control. He also casts Blade Stitch Scob, giving his other zombies +1/+0 and putting a counter on his champion. Bilal casts Gifted Aetherborn, getting a copy of it and a vampire token. He casts Fervent Charge, giving his creatures +2/+2 until end of turn when they attack, and sacrifices a vampire token, making Jason lose a life while Bilal gains a life. After that, he casts Sorin Imperious Bloodlord, activating his -3 ability to put a vampire from his hand into play, choosing Drana, Liberator of Malakir. When she comes in, Bilal makes a token copy of her, choosing to keep the copy instead of the original due to the legend rule, making Jason lose a life while Bilal gains a life. He then moves to combat, attacking Jason for 8 with his 2 flyers and the copy of Gifted Aetherborn, triggering Legion's Landing, transforming it into Adanto the First Fort. Before the damage though, Jason casts Aether Spouts, returning all attacking creatures to the top or bottom of their owner's library. In Jason's upkeep, he makes 4 more zombies with Endless Ranks of the Dead, putting 4 counters on Champion of the Perished. He then casts Empty the Laboratory for X = 4, sacrificing 4 zombies to reveal cards from the top of his library till he reveals 4 zombies, putting them into play. This also has him losing 4 life and drawing 4 cards from the Undead Augur, plus he loses 4 more life while Bilal gains 4 thanks to the Blood Artist. Unfortunately, none of the zombies he's able to find can save him from Bilal's Blood Artist, so Jason decides to concede, winning Bilal the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely very Halloween flavored there with the zombies, the vampires, the horrors, and then the demons. We unfortunately didn't quite get the chance to do quite as much as I would like. We really got on the back foot pretty early on. The zombies and vampires came out swinging, and the demons and the nightmares kind of fell behind. It didn't help that zombies and vampires tend to be very go wide strategies, while demons tend to be very go tall. So we were putting out maybe 1/6/6, and our opponents had just an army of 2/2s and 1/1s. And I think overall we tend to lose that battle. But I do think it performed very well. Getting Herald of Slanesh on board very quickly was very, very helpful, and it definitely allowed us to stay alive for as long as we did. Whiffing on the Kaalia trigger was not great, and I think that maybe if we'd been able to hit some of the cards with her, we could be doing a little bit better, but overall, I'm very happy with how the deck performed. I think everyone else's decks also performed very well. I know Shawn kind of got stuck in the same position we did, where he kept playing horrors and nightmares, and they kind of had to just be on chump blocking duty because he didn't have too much else that he could do to pressure the rest of the board. Jason's zombies also very impressive, but unfortunately the zombies kind of crumbled to the Blood Artist. I do think that if the Blood Artist hadn't been in play, I think that Jason probably could have won the game. I think that he was going to eventually go wider than the vampires could, but the Blood Artist really sealed the deal there. And then, of course, talking about Edgar, it is, well, it's Edgar Markov. It did Edgar Markov things. It made a ton of vampires, drained people out, and did a ton of damage. So very impressive showing overall by everybody. Let me know down in the comments which deck you thought might have been the best in a non-Halloween themed week. But overall, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. And other than that, I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.